All right, today we're diving into a medication that's a real veteran, one that's been around for decades, but is still one of the most versatile tools in a doctor's toolkit. Nortriptyline. It's a classic story of balancing some pretty powerful benefits with some equally serious risks.
I know what you're thinking. An antidepressant from the 60s? And we're using it for chronic pain? It sounds kind of weird, doesn't it? So what's the secret? How does this, old school medication pull off such a modern day trick?
So let's get into it. Nortriptyline is what we call a second-generation tricyclic antidepressant, or TCA for short. Basically, it's an update on an older drug, amitriptyline. And the big deal here is that it's generally known for being a bit easier on the system, better tolerated than some of the original TCAs. It really is a medical classic, but one with a modern role.
Okay, so what in the world is a tricyclic antidepressant? Well, the name's actually pretty literal. It just comes from its chemical structure, which has, you guessed it, 3 rings. And since nortriptyline is second generation, you can think of it as an evolution, a refinement of that original idea. Same family, just a newer model.
All right, now for the really cool part, how this stuff actually rewires the brain. You gotta think of nortriptyline's mechanism as a two-sided coin. On one side, you've got the good stuff, the reason you take it. But on the other side, well, that's where all the side effects come from. Let's break down both sides of that coin.
Okay, so here's the main event. Your brain cells are constantly talking to each other using these chemical messengers. You've probably heard of them, norepinephrine and serotonin. Now, after a message gets sent, these tiny little pumps, they're called reuptake pumps, start sucking those messengers back up. What nortriptyline does is it gets in there and it blocks those pumps. And the result? You get more of those signal-regulating chemicals just hanging out in the space between your brain cells. It's kind of like turning up the volume on the signals that help control your mood and, crucially, your perception of pain.
And this slide really shows you that two-sided coin I was talking about. See, on the one hand, nortriptyline is doing its main job, cranking up the levels of norepinephrine and serotonin to fight depression and pain. That's the goal, right? But at the same time, it's also mucking around with other receptors, blocking things like histamine and acetylcholine. And that's the trade-off. That's exactly why you get those classic side effects like feeling drowsy or having a super dry mouth.
So this gets us to the heart of why this old drug is still such a big deal today. Officially, it's FDA-approved for major depression, but its real claim to fame, its surprising versatility, comes from all the off-label uses. That's when doctors prescribe it for stuff it wasn't originally approved for. And believe me, there are a lot of them.
And you can see it right here. A huge chunk of the prescriptions for this drug today aren't even for depression. Look at this chart. Neuropathic pain, migraine prevention. That's a massive part of its modern job. This drug has seriously found a whole new life for itself, way beyond its original purpose, especially in the world of pain management.
I love this quote. Turning down the volume on chronic pain signals. It's just the perfect way to describe it. For really tough conditions, like, say, diabetic nerve pain or that awful pain that can linger after shingles, nortriptyline isn't just a painkiller. It's not masking the symptom, no. It's actually getting into the central nervous system and literally turning down the volume on those pain signals. It's quieting them down before they even have a chance to scream at your brain.
Okay, so let's get practical. If you or someone you know is actually prescribed this, what can you expect? Let's treat this next part like a little user's guide, covering how it's dosed and what it actually feels like to take it.
Now, the #1 rule with nortriptyline is always start low and go slow. You can see the starting doses are tiny, especially when it's used for pain, and then they're slowly ramped up over time. Oh, and here's a key detail. Since it can make you pretty drowsy, it's almost always taken at night, right before bed, which is actually kind of smart, right? You get to sleep through some of the initial side effects.
All right, let's talk about those side effects. Remember how we said it blocks other receptors as a trade-off? Well, here's the result of that. We're talking dry mouth, feeling sleepy, constipation. These are super common, especially when you first start. But here's the good news. For a lot of people, these things tend to fade away as your body gets used to the medication over a few weeks.
But, and this is a really big but, it is absolutely critical to know the difference between a side effect that's just annoying and one that's a genuine red flag. Some things are just a nuisance. Other things, they're a sign of a serious problem.
And these are the ones you need to watch out for. We're talking a fast or irregular heartbeat, any kind of seizure, or a sudden dramatic mood shift into mania. Any of that, and you need medical help right away. We also have to talk about the FDA's black box warning. This is the most serious kind of warning. For nortriptyline, and really all antidepressants, there's a risk of increased suicidal thoughts, especially in kids, teens, and young adults, right when they start the drug. This is why careful monitoring is just non-negotiable.
Look, because this drug is so powerful and carries these kinds of risks, it comes with some absolutely ironclad safety rules. Think of this next bit as the do not ignore section of the user manual. This is how you stay out of serious trouble.
Okay, listen up, because this is huge. You absolutely cannot take nortriptyline with a different class of antidepressants called MAOIs. It's a total no-go. The combination can cause a life-threatening spike in blood pressure. Also, mixing it with things that slow down your brain, like alcohol or opioids, is a bad idea. It can make you dangerously sedated. And finally, since it can mess with your heart's rhythm, you definitely don't want to combine it with other drugs that have that same effect.
And it's not just about other drugs. Certain health conditions require extreme caution too. If you've got a history of heart problems, glaucoma, or a seizure disorder, taking nortriptyline is a much bigger deal. It doesn't mean you can't take it, but it does mean you need super close medical supervision.
Let me be crystal clear about this next point, because there's no room for misunderstanding. An overdose of a tricyclic antidepressant like nortriptyline is incredibly dangerous. It can be fatal, it can cause devastating heart problems, seizures, and coma. This is always a medical emergency, period.
So, after hearing all that, the good and the really bad, how do we wrap our heads around this drug? Well, it's not simple. It really is a classic tale of weighing some powerful rewards against some pretty significant risks.
And really, it all boils down to this trade-off you see here. On the benefits side, you've got a seriously potent and effective tool for both depression and chronic pain. But on the risk side, you're dealing with a hefty list of side effects, a minefield of drug interactions, and a real, genuine danger if someone overdoses. It's the definition of a medical trade-off.
And that, I think, is the best way to think about nortriptyline. The fact that we're still using it so much today, decades later, is a huge testament to just how effective it can be. But that power, that potency, it absolutely demands respect. In the right hands, with a doctor who knows what they're doing and manages it carefully, it is still an incredibly valuable tool.
So I'll leave you with this final thought. In our modern world, with all these new, fancy, targeted medications coming out all the time, what does it mean that this 60-year-old drug is still one of our best shots for tackling some really tough conditions? It kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? Is an old, well-understood tool sometimes the best one for the job? Thanks so much for joining me.